Hist-o-rama. From out of the past, the story of glamour and the pinup girl in just a moment. During World War II, psychologists maintained that a valuable contribution to the high morale of our armed forces was the presence of the Hollywood pinup. High atop the popularity poll reigned the oomph girl, Anne Sheridan. But contrary to popular belief, World War II was not the dawn of the pinup era. This was the beginning, the early days of the Hollywood flicker, where the siren of the silent screen wore more clothing to the beach than she did in a snowstorm. The shock of bare knees on the silver screen rocked the public, and bathing beauties became a box office bonanza. All major film companies rushed to form their scantily clad units. How about that? But the master of them all was Mack Sennett, who combined the comic with the daring of the bathing costume, making his pictures the most provocative films of the 20s. And speaking of comedy, the great, rotund, universal picture comic Huey Mack capitalized on the bathing beauty fad, which tickled the funny bone of his fans, but could never quite overshadow the interest in the real thing, gorgeous gams. However, bathing beauties and beach scenes were soon forgotten, as Theda Bara, seen here in William Fox's production of Salome, became the vamp and first pinup to bring beauty to the boudoir, and to help keep it there with those who followed. Norma Shearer, the darling of the MGM lot. A young starlet by the name of Jeanette MacDonald, whose glamour and beautiful voice later helped her to stardom in musicals of the early 30s. The I'll Cry Tomorrow girl, Lillian Roth, personally chosen by C.B. DeMille for the leading role in Madam Satan. And Clara Bow, whose lack of costume skyrocketed her to fame as the it girl, the truly first pinup. Though pinups and the boudoir became synonymous, the advent of the one-piece bathing suit sent producers scurrying back to beaches, dreams, or any nearby swimming pool. And the starlet's schedule included shots in the highly controversial swimwear. Many who wore them became first ladies of the screen. Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Joan Blondell, the immortal Jean Harlow, and the unpredictable Greta Garbo, who switched suits and insisted that her swimwear would be of her own design. And so it continued, Hollywood's parade of pinup personalities, a rung in the ladder leading these beauties to fame in other fields as well. Myrna Loy, in later years prominent in the United Nations. This famous pinup is now an expert in motion picture direction. Ida Lupino, who's also joined the executive ranks with her own film company. For a little-known dancer named Consino, the beauty of the still pinup had a far-reaching effect. She became Rita Hayworth, first real-life princess selected from the glamorous pinup queens of Hollywood. The Hollywood pinup of today, queens in many domains, owe a great deal to the pretty pinup princess of another era. Hist-o-rama. From out of the past, the story of an actor who'd known fame as a teenaged old man. For many, the name of Lon Chaney remains unchallenged as the screen's all-time master of makeup. But to the devotees of the legitimate stage, there is one name that stands head and shoulders above all others as the artist who ruled the boards as not only one of the most eminent thespians of the 20th century, but as the creator of Broadway's most unusual character illusions. These faces, old, pensive, handsome, foppish, dashing, and shriveled, belong to a penetrating young actor named Paul Muni, whose first theatrical bit as a teenager was playing an old man, the first of many old man roles to follow. Because of Muni's variables, such as his famous Willie Smith the Cockney, Hollywood lured this fine talent before the cameras. And it was star maker Howard Hughes who unleashed the excitement of the Muni vitality in United Artists' Scarface. The strength and effectiveness of his portrayal of the tough mobster quickly established a dominion of Muni fan clubs, and his days as a free agent came to an end when Warner Brothers rushed in and signed him to a contract. To capitalize on Scarface, I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang was selected as his first starring Vitaphone vehicle. Muni's command of the role, coupled with the fine direction of Mervyn LeRoy, made the picture another Muni success, a box office smash, and a cop's dilemma. For the hard-working star, exhausted by day's end, drove home from work in costume and makeup, much to the dismay of a confused and perplexed Hollywood police force. Hard-hitting roles in High Nellie and Black Fury helped ensure the success of this popular star. But his return to the beard and lines of age aided him in painting the perfect picture of Louis Pasteur, the sensitive, misunderstood scientist whose cause was as frustrating as the diseases confronting him. Muni's incredible performance extended his popularity to the very doorstep of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, who paid him tribute with the Golden Oscar as the Best Actor of the Year. To Paul Muni, winning the award meant accepting the challenge of doing better things. On loan out to MGM, he proved that success is only propagated by ability. As Wang Lung the farmer in The Good Earth, Pearl Buck's epic story of China, he and co-star Louise Rainer reaped many laurels and awards for the Culver City establishment. Bidding adieu to some of his distinguished colleagues, he returned to his home lot for another living image portrayal, this time as the great French novelist Émile Zola. With Muni, there was always the feeling of watching the true historical figure, never an actor. Thus the reason for sending him to Mexico to observe the local color and customs of the Mexican people. This actor's actor, now famous throughout the world, had been chosen to recreate the life of another immortal, Benito Juarez, which was perhaps Paul Muni's greatest filmed moment. In later years, Paul Muni divided his talents between pictures and the Broadway stage. Whatever the vehicle, critics could never find enough superlatives to extol the merits of this truly great performer. Hist-o-rama. From out of the past, the story of Harold Lloyd, wizard of slapstick and specs. Once upon a time, the sleepy little pueblo of Los Angeles, California, was considered a quiet, tranquil little community. Quiet, that is, until one of cinema's greatest comics moved in and took over. Harold Lloyd, the man who parlayed a pair of windowless specs into a Raja's fortune. It all started in Nebraska, where Lloyd's one-year-old camera debut was not quite as auspicious as this pose at the age of 3. It was evident even then that a window ledge was to become Lloyd's best prop. The years rolled on, and so did Harold Lloyd, to San Diego, California, where he tried his hand playing character parts on the legitimate stage. But the smell of dollar-scented celluloid attracted him to Los Angeles, where he appeared as part of the scenery in Samson and Delilah. But Dame Fortune had it all figured out, for standing next to Lloyd was a chunky fellow named Hal Roach. This chance meeting resulted in the forming of the Lloyd-Roach Partnership, the first cobblestone on the road to fame for both. An old mansion on historic Bunker Hill in downtown Los Angeles housed the Lloyd-Roach Studios and was the birthplace of Lloyd's first famous character, Lonesome Luke, whose 2 reelers sold for the unheard-of amount of $850 each. Lonesome Luke's success prompted Lloyd to search for another character, one that was to become permanent. Hal Roach directed the bespectacled Lloyd, who kept poking his fingers, much to the delight of his audience, through his windowless specs. However, the crazy slapstick gyrations seemed to do nothing for Bebe Daniels, a young girl in search of a career. Glasses and broad gags became Lloyd's forte. In an early Hal Roach comedy, Snub Pollard, for many years the man on the other end of Lloyd's gags, waited patiently while Lloyd doled out spaghetti by the yard. In Girl Shy, Lloyd had the audience howling as he tried to shake a chicken from his shoulder while riding a motorcycle at high speed through heavy traffic. Gags like these continued to reap the harvest of fame and fortune. one of the greatest hits of 1922 was Grandma's Boy, which saw Lloyd as an overgrown Walter Mitty-type daydreamer who whipped the daylights out of the whole befuddled Union Army. In Pathé's Why Worry, Lloyd resorted to his surefire gags as he tried to sell a giant shrinking pill. And when it seemed that Lloyd's gag bag was running dry, he topped everything he'd ever done in Safety Last, tagged as the greatest thrill picture of the silence. Audiences roared and shuddered in fascinated horror when Lloyd slipped on an edge or hung by his fingernails from 20 stories up. And if this wasn't enough, his run-in with a streetcar left the audience limp. In The Freshman, he duplicated these same feats. At the height of his career, he bade farewell to two friends, Charlie Chaplin and Douglas Fairbanks, then went into retirement. Many years later, RKO coaxed Lloyd to come out of retirement and star in what was to be his last picture. The Lloyd formula still worked. His gags proved to be as laugh-provoking as they were in the silence. Today, Harold Lloyd lives in the quiet seclusion of his beloved Green Acres estate, the house that gags built. Hist-o-rama. From out of the past, the story of Fred MacMurray, ruler of a light and comical domain. Some of the screen's lightest, funniest moments have been manifested by this star, who's considered the chief exponent of the sensitive side of the motion picture industry's funny bone. Born Fred MacMurray, Jr. in Kankakee, Illinois, he was but a few weeks old when his concert-touring parents settled down in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. There, Fred enjoyed a happy childhood that was to influence his outlook on life in later years. For the summers were filled with pleasantries of outdoor sports, and the winters devoted to his schooling, which led to a short stay in military academy, and later, an even shorter stay in college. A trip to California and an audition landed him a job as a saxophone-playing vocalist at the Warner Hollywood Theater, where he was spotted by a group called the California Collegians, hired and whisked away to Broadway for the group's featured stint in Three's a Crowd and later Roberta, which featured George Murphy as the dancing comedian. Fred was chosen to understudy the leading man, and after watching him in several performances, Paramount Pictures scouts arranged the screen test. He was signed, and before he realized what was happening, Fred was back in California. As a duck to water, the likable MacMurray took to making friends, pictures, and the wonderful mode of California living, which afforded extra hours for relaxation during the shooting of Walter Wanger's Trail of the Lonesome Pine. 13 Hours by Air with Joan Bennett and John Howard was his next role, followed by the first time for everyone type role in a Western as a Texas Ranger. However, the laughs were left to sidekick Jack Oakey and the nefarious schemes to Lloyd Nolan. The studio seemed to favor MacMurray's sober side as the Maid of Salem filled him with New England philosophy and placed him astride a horse again. But suddenly the pressure cap went off. Aided and abetted by John Barrymore and Carol Lombard, Fred finally found the springboard for his amusing, mirth-provoking misgivings in Paramount's True Confession. And even though more straight dramatic roles followed, including more stints in the stirrups, his fans retained the most vivid illusion which constantly bordered on the diversionary and was prompted by the hours of side-splitting laughter brought on by a scene like this, which was so typical of the MacMurray touch. The uncertainty of war brought on the usual sentimental roles. But once over, pandemonium prevailed as Fred, joined by another singing sax-toting buddy, Rudy Valley, cavorted with Maureen O'Hara up the middle and around the end in 20th Century Fox's Laugh Riot, Father Was a Fullback. Things were back to normal for everyone, including our star, who joined one of his favorite leading ladies in The Egg and I and managed to become trapped in the many chicken-chasing capers caused by Miss Claudette Colbert and company. Then it happened. Fred chose to concentrate on straight dramatic fare. The hearts of his followers were saddened by the MacMurray choice. But it was Walt Disney, the great heart mender himself, who, with the shaggy dog and the absent-minded professor, helped restore the light comedy crown to the House of MacMurray, undisputed ruler of laughter and merriment. Hollywood Hist-o-rama. From out of the past, the story of Hollywood's beginning. One might say the sparkle and glitter that is Hollywood today all began with a bet on a running horse. In 1878, California's Governor Leland Stanford wagered that a running horse simultaneously had all four hoofs off the ground. He hired Edward Maybridge to photograph the event, and the governor won his bet. Fascinated by this discovery, Maybridge continued to experiment with progressive motion, and in 1886, while teaching at Columbia University, photographed the historic Little Girl Running, and with it, the golden era of the silent screen was born. However, it was America's greatest inventor, Thomas Alva Edison, who in 1893 solved the technical problems of the motion picture camera, and in the same year built his Black Maria, the first American motion picture studio. But motion pictures must be projected to be seen, and it was Edison's projectoscope that was hailed the world over as the 19th century marvel. Through it, one could view such exciting subjects as a game of cards, tearing down a building, the coronation of the Tsar of Russia, and all for 15 cents. People hailed the motion picture as an interesting oddity, and standing room crowds flocked to see it, but few gave it a chance to succeed as a commercial venture. However, an early pioneer, one David Horsley, recognized the motion picture for what it could be, and in 1907 opened the first independent motion picture studio, becoming the Edison Company's biggest competitor. Not to be outdone, the Edison Company filmed a super colossal 5-minute featurette entitled Rescued from an Eagle's Nest that set the movie fans abuzz. The stars, a baby, a stuffed eagle, painted backdrops, and an actor named D.W. Griffith, who later moved out to Hollywood to go on to immortal fame as the producer-director of Intolerance, Birth of a Nation, and countless others. But it was France who startled the exhibitor and public alike with Elizabeth and Essex, the world's first big feature film. This nitrate blockbuster starred Lou Tellegen and the great Sarah Bernhardt. The amazing success of Elizabeth and Essex prompted the American producers to increase schedules to full-length feature pitch. But the open-air studios and inclement eastern weather just didn't mix. And for the second time, pioneers headed west to an unknown spot called Hollywood, California. The first studio in Los Angeles County was nothing more than a hovel, as was the second, occupied by the Nestor Film Company on Sunset and Gower, the present site of Columbia Pictures. It's evident that in the beginning, the only thing super colossal was the producer's expectations. But expectations, dreams, and high hopes became realities as the box office gold strike continued. Muslin-covered studios replaced the hovels, and the movie maker was proud of his cloth-covered place in the sun. So proud, he invited the public to attend the shooting at 25 cents per seat, of course. Soon the temporary-looking muslin-covered studio disappeared. It was replaced by stone and mortar, an expression of confidence in the future of things to come. The same confidence echoed by all pioneers. Reaching your destination is one thing, but it's what follows that really counts. And what followed this beginning is another fantastic story in itself. Hollywood Hist-o-rama, from out of the past, the story of Jean Harlow, platinum beauty of the silver screen. If someone had told young Harleen Carpentier that someday she'd grow up to become the world's most famous platinum blonde, she'd probably have smiled, tipped her head, defensively clutched her doll, and wondered what the whole thing was all about, including the definition of the word platinum, which was to have an all-important meaning in the life of this young lass. For many years later, she was to take her place among filmdom's elite as Jean Harlow, a star whose beginning was as unglamorous as some of the early one-piece bathing suits she modeled, and whose many moves were governed by certain superstitions, such as never being without her ever-present good luck ankle bracelet. At first, Jean Harlow considered the movies as somewhat of a lark, and contracted with Hal Roach for appearances in many of his comedies. But it was an accidental introduction to Howard Hughes that brought the seriousness and scope of her profession nearer to her as he cast her in Hell's Angels, the aviation epic with Ben Lyon and James Hall. The picture was a boon to the career of the dazzling Harlow, who strengthened her role as a favorite with the Secret Six, The Iron Men, Public Enemy, and the appropriately titled Platinum Blonde, a Frank Capra hit for Columbia, which found Jean calling on her early experiences in comedy and introduced her to another much sought-after star, Loretta Young, who made the perfect teammate for this now determined, full-fledged actress, who was willing to shed the illusion of glamour by allowing herself to be dipped and drenched before the eyes of millions who delighted in these dousing antics. With Chester Morris and Henry Stevenson, Jean's next was Red-Headed Woman. Then Red Dust with Mary Astor, Jean Raymond, and Clark Gable, who was teaming with the gorgeous Jean for the first time, and whose success together took them through Hold Your Man and many others that followed. Though her career and success seemed as secure as could be, Jean Harlow lived with the apprehensions and fears of the superstitious, which continued to remain quite evident by the ever-present good luck ankle bracelet, and the use of a tiny mirror which, without glancing into it at least once, she'd refused to leave the dressing room for the set. Following the successful Dinner at 8 with Wallace Beery, MGM capitalized on the Harlow publicity and trademark when Ted Healy and Frank Morgan were called upon to romp through the laugh-filled Blonde Bombshell. Then Reckless, China Seas, and Riff Raff with Spencer Tracy and Mickey Rooney placed Jean's career at its pinnacle. And with Wife vs. Secretary, Susie, Libel Lady, and Personal Property, co-starring a youngster named Taylor, Jean was now ready for the most important role of her career in Saratoga. But fate, whose accidental kindness marked Jean's film beginning, was to ring down the final curtain on her short but sensational career. Jean had a feeling, a premonition, one that was to come true before the picture was completed. Jean Harlow was summoned by death, and her passing left a feeling of emptiness in the hearts of millions who could not believe that she was gone. Her rare radiance of beauty still lives in the memories of many, thus enshrining the beautiful image of Jean Harlow in the indelible pages of time. Hollywood Hist-o-rama, from out of the past, the story of Maurice Chevalier, a pixie in love with his work. Few entertainers have ever commanded the affectionate esteem in which the world's audiences hold the name of Maurice Chevalier, who began a near-fabled career in the Paris cafe circuit at the ripe old age of 11 years. Billed as Le Petit Chevalier, his daytime carpentry and nighttime pursuit of his career kept him busy until he was 17. It was then he was spotted by Miss Tinguette, the Paris nightclub queen, who insisted he join her at the Folies Bergère, where the pair quickly became a continental rage, which lasted until the outbreak of the First World War. Having learned English in a prison camp, Maurice appeared in London revues after the war, becoming an overnight sensation. But America had to wait until 1929 to be treated to Chevalier's inimitable charm and magnetic showmanship. In Paramount's Innocents of Paris, co-starring the celebrated George Fawcett, the Grand Pixie's hook was cast, and he returned to Paris with America's heart in his hand. Paramount Studios happily responded to a nation's demand. The public clamored for Chevalier, and he returned, to the delight of his millions of new friends. He was cast opposite Jeanette MacDonald in The Love Parade, and this handsome phenomenon readily emerged as the chief topic of conversation at teas and women's bridge clubs. While a grateful country poured its heart out to him, Chevalier paused to learn about its foods, enjoy its healthful recreation, and enter into a surprise friendship with the great William S. Hart, who taught him how to ride during his many visits to the Hart Ranch. He learned the humor of Maggie and Jiggs from the creator himself, George McManus. And when he'd finished work, he'd don his rehearsal clothes and take walks about the studio for visits and quests of Americana, which helped to become America's adopted Yankee Doodle dandy. Once more before the cameras, he teamed again with Jeanette MacDonald in 1 Hour with You. Then followed The Way to Love with Sylvia Sidney, and next, the leader of the Apaches in Paramount on Parade. But he really stuck his famous neck out by agreeing to join Baby Leroy, Hollywood's greatest scene stealer, in a bedtime story. Its success proved two old pros could get along under any circumstance. For his beloved American public, time was running out as war clouds again threatened to deprive the world of this happy troubadour's ingratiating mannerisms. His last picture before departure for France was MGM's The Merry Widow, with his favorite co-star, Jeanette MacDonald. This time, there was a certain sadness and an uncertain feeling about his leaving. The war in Europe had erupted, and for the next 11 years, his public was left with memories and the lilting refrains of Mimi, Louise, and other hits that were his alone. Fortunately, a Second World War could not shackle the Chevalier charm. Though gray, his jauntiness, captivating smile, and magnetism remained undimmed by the passing of years. Older generations anxiously awaited his re-entry into pictures, and when he did, old friends helped introduce him to the new. Accolades afforded him in Love in the Afternoon, Gigi and Can-Can were a grateful public's small way of saying, welcome back. Would that the sands of time bequeath the world his unending musical pleasures, or promise to discover another with the pixiest charm of the great Maurice Chevalier, the 20th century's eternally youthful troubadour.